I've been working in the field for 40 years now, 4 decades, and I think it began with my PhD, which I conducted at the University of York in England. And there I was very interested in physiological arousal. The idea that we all differ in our degree of arousal. Some people have low arousal, some people have high arousal, some people are at the average level of arousal. Measures of arousal are things like heart rate, sweat rate activity, the technical term is skin conductance activity. Also EEG, the electroencephalogram, it's a measure of the electrical activity of the brain. In my very first study, I took these 3 measures of arousal in 15-year-old school children. And I found that those boys with low levels of arousal were more antisocial as reported by their school teachers. But more importantly, I followed them up for 9 years until they were aged 24. And what I found is that each of the 3 measures of physiological arousal predicted to criminal offending 9 years later. Now, why is low physiological arousal related to criminal behaviour? Well, imagine you take a 15-year-old schoolboy, you bring him into a laboratory, you put electrodes on him, he's never met me before. It's a little bit of an anxiety-provoking situation. And during that time, if, for example, you are normal, your heart rate will go up. You'll sweat a little bit more. Just like I'm sweating a little bit with that camera on me now. My brain will be more highly activated. That's if I respond to the fear, anxiety-provoking situation. But if I lack fear, if I'm a fearless individual, my heart rate will stay low. That's why we were finding, I believe, that those schoolboys with low arousal in that situation are more likely to commit criminal acts 9 years later. Because if you have an appropriate level of fear, then you are worried about what will happen if I rob a store, what will happen if I cheat on my tax return forms. But if I lack that fear, I'm more likely to steal, more likely to rob from a store. Incidentally, social factors also predict to later crime, but we were finding that these biological measures are predicting over and above the social factors that go to make an individual more likely to become criminal. Going back then, another study we did, which I like, is a study of 4,000 babies. These were all babies born in Copenhagen, Denmark, in a certain hospital. We measured birth complications at the time of birth. We followed them up into their first year, and we had social workers go to all the homes of the babies, interviewing the mother. And in the interview, we assessed whether the mother rejected the child, whether she did not want the child. We followed up these 4,000 male babies for 18 years. And what we found is that it's when you get the combination of both birth complications and the social rejection of the child, that's when we got an exponential increase in violence 18 years later. The sample with both of these factors were 3 times more likely to become violent. And looking back at the work I have done, I think that was an important study in 1994 because it was the first convincing demonstration that biological factors conspire together with social factors very early on in life to raise the odds that somebody will become violent. I I think it's important to clarify in everything I say that there's no destiny. Not every child with birth complications grows up, of course, to become a violent offender. Not every child from a negative family home background becomes criminal. No. But these are some of the factors that go to shape the criminal offender. And to use a metaphor, I view the violent offender as like a jigsaw puzzle. There's lots of different pieces that go to make up that individual. Birth complications may be one thing, low physiological arousal may be another, high testosterone levels may be another factor. There's not one piece, but we've known for many years what the social pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are. Now, in the past 20 years, we've been documenting more the biological pieces. And what we're beginning to do is put the pieces together to make up the violent criminal offender, because it's when I think we can predict better to future offending that we'll be in a better position to be able to stop offending before it starts. We studied 41 murderers. We brain scanned them, compared them to 41 other murderers. And we found that poor functioning of the very frontal region of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that characterized the murderers as a group compared to the normal individuals. And from a neurological standpoint, this makes sense, because this very frontal region of the brain is involved in checking impulsive behavior. When we feel like lashing out, it's the frontal cortex that says, no, wait a little bit, maybe this isn't a good time, a good place to strike. Also, the frontal cortex is involved in emotion regulation, regulating our emotions. We all get angry at times, don't we? You must all get angry, I get angry. What stops me lashing out is a good functioning prefrontal cortex that regulates my emotions. So that frontal cortex is like the guardian angel on behavior. But if the guardian angel is asleep, as it is in murderers, then the devil can come out. People can get killed. Psychopaths are criminal offenders. They lack conscience, they lack remorse, they lack guilt. A part of the brain that's critically involved in emotion, the amygdala, is a brain area we scanned in a group of psychopaths and compared the volume, the size of the amygdala in the psychopaths compared to the normal control group. And what we documented here is that the amygdala, which is critically important for emotions, is reduced in volume by 18% in the psychopaths compared to the normal controls. So if you have a psychopathic criminal offender in front of you who doesn't care about what they have done, that isn't concerned about the victims and does not seem remorseful, you can ask yourself, what makes a person like that? And I think part of the answer is that they have a structural impairment to that emotional part of the brain, the amygdala, that gives rise to these feelings of empathy and warmth and care and love for other people. We were interested in the amygdala. We were interested in the fact that psychopaths make bad moral decisions. Now we know that when we make moral decisions, that brain area, the amygdala, is quite strongly activated. You might be familiar with some of the laboratory tasks that we use to give people difficult moral decisions. You know, one is the trolley dilemma. You've got a runaway train on a railway track going to kill 5 railway workers. You are standing on a footbridge looking over the railway line. Standing next to you is a large gentleman. You can save the 5 lives if you push the big man off the bridge. He stops the train, he dies, but you save 5. Question, will you push him off the bridge? You won't, but some people would. You really should. It's utilitarian moral decision making, 5 for 1. I think no matter what we decide, we get a little bit emotional. And the reason for that is that the amygdala is activated. What we found when we put psychopaths through a test like that and assess amygdala functioning, we find that the higher the psychopathy score, the lower the amygdala functioning. Emotion drives moral behavior, the feeling of what is right and wrong. That feeling is very important in whether we do right or wrong. But if the amygdala is burnt out in psychopaths for reasons beyond their control, then how moral is it of us to punish psychopaths as harshly as we do? Has the criminal justice system got it right when it comes to punishment and responsibility? Although, of course, this is a very difficult question to answer, and it goes beyond science, certainly. I think an important question is, it's fine to document a biological brain basis to crime and violence. Okay, but what are we going to do about it? That's a difficult question to answer. And certainly, we have not been conducting biological interventions to reduce crime and violence. But I think we should, or that we should begin to consider biological interventions alongside psychological and social interventions to stop future crime. What we have been doing recently is conducting randomized controlled trials where we give omega-3 to children. They have conduct disorder, antisocial behavior. But in this randomized controlled trial, we give omega-3 to half of them. They are randomized to get a drink, a fruit juice drink containing 1 gram of omega-3 a day. The control group get the same drink, except it does not contain the omega-3. But what we do find is that this treatment does reduce aggressive and antisocial behavior. It's especially effective in reducing impulsive, what we call reactive aggression. This treatment is reducing aggression about 20%, 20-25%. We're finding that the reduction in aggression continues even after they stop taking the omega-3 drink. The caveat, however, is we've only followed them up for 6 months after the treatment finishes. So, how long does this last? We don't know. If bad brain causes bad behavior, the logic would be, well, let's upregulate the brain to improve social behavior. That's the simple logic of it. We have a long way to go. So far, there have only been 2 randomized controlled trials giving omega-3 to prisoners. One in the United Kingdom, the other in the Netherlands. In both cases, they found a 33 to 35% reduction in serious offending in the prison. So that put us on to the idea that perhaps omega-3, in particular within nutrition, could be useful. I'll describe one more recent study. This is a study my graduate student conducted, Olivia Choi. This is a technique called transcranial direct current stimulation. This is a technique where you pass an electrical current through a part of the brain. In this case, we passed it through the prefrontal cortex. This is a technique which can, if you like, upregulate the functioning of that region of the brain. We did that for just 20 minutes. It's a randomized controlled trial. 40 men get the stimulation. 40 think they are getting the stimulation, but they don't. The next day, one day after, we bring them back to the laboratory. We give them what's called a social vignette, meaning imagine, remember you're a man, imagine you're in a bar with your girlfriend. You go to the toilet, you come back and you see this other man hitting on your girlfriend. He's chatting her up, he's flirting with her. And you are told, in that situation, would you pick up the bottle and whack him on the head? What we were finding is that the group who had received the prefrontal upregulation the day before, they were showing a 40% reduction in the likelihood in that situation that they would commit a physically aggressive act. The prefrontal upregulation is reducing the intention to commit a criminal act. Importantly, she also measured aggressive behavior in the laboratory, but she did not find that the transcranial direct current stimulation reduced behavior. It reduces intention. So that's an important thing to bear in mind. Mind you, that was only one stimulation session. What if there was more? What if it wasn't for one day? What if it was for several weeks? Could we find that it could reduce behavior? Because intention to act is the beginning of actual behavior, isn't it? So the stimulation, upregulation of the frontal cortex is enhancing our sense of morality. And that's what's accounting for, in part, the reduction in the intention to commit a criminal act. There's something about that we feel uncomfortable with. People are worried about changing the brain. The counterpoint, however, is that even social interventions change the brain. Cognitive behavior therapy, a social psychological therapy, is known to change the brain afterwards. That's why behavior changes, that's why emotion changes. So that would be my response to those who are worried about brain changes. Our brains are changing all the time. So if society, I think, can begin to get used more and more to understanding our brains are changing every minute, every day, perhaps they would be less concerned about the use of biological techniques to reduce antisocial behavior. We want to change behavior. The other important point is, will it change behavior not just tomorrow, not just in a week's time, but will it reduce recidivistic offending in a year's time, 2 years' time? That's what the law is looking for with any intervention that any of us try to create for prisoners. The important challenge is, can we show reductions in offending when they're let out of the prison? Not just does it reduce aggressive behavior in the prison, do I believe in free will? To be honest, no. I believe I'm a machine. I'm constructed of, I've got genes which shape physiological processes in my brain to shape my behavior, and that those genes conspire together with environmental experiences to make me do what I do. There's a cause of all behavior. All behavior is cause. Do I make decisions? Yes, I do. But I think it's more complicated than that. Of course we make decisions, but there are neural processes that will make me decide whether or not to get up and leave this room, or whether to stay and keep on answering your questions. And those neural processes, again, are predicated on genetic makeup, environmental experiences, and chance events as well, which are also out of our control. And so what do we do about this? People are worried about no free will. Well, I think we should just accept it. Recognize that all behavior is determined. The question would be, to what extent do we punish offenders as much as we do if the causes of their behavior are beyond their control? I do make decisions every day, every minute, of course I do. But I think the causes of those decisions are beyond me. I mean, they come from me, they come from my brain. Am I in charge of my brain? Yes and no. If a part of me is in charge of my brain processing, it's not coming from the outside, it's coming from within me, physiologically. The question is, could we blame them? Should we blame them? One way to think about it is to say, look, wake up everyone, there's no free will, but we have to live in a practical world, a practical society. And if somebody is running around committing crimes, even if it's beyond their control, we have to do something. We have to protect society. I think we all agree with that, but with the idea that there is no free will, I think it makes a bit of a difference to the whole issue of retribution and the extent to which we punish people. What's the counterpoint? I'm a parent, I have 2 boys. Have I punished them? Yes, I have. Of course I have, when they were children. They need to be socialized. To some extent, everyone needs to be corrected. And sometimes, even if it's a mild punishment, taking away their toy or not giving them some sweets, children need to learn. So at some level, you could argue we all, even though we've grown older, we can still learn. We're always learning. And to the extent that punishment is part of socializing a child, it can be argued that we still need punishment in society, even when the individual is an adolescent, even when they are an adult. Of course, the question will come, how much punishment? And I think the law does, degrees to which we blame an individual. And we look at the individual and we say, well, do they know what they were doing at the time? Do they know what they were doing is wrong? If you don't know what you're doing at the time, and you don't know that what you're doing is wrong, then in American law, you lack rational capacity. You are not responsible. But the way I see it is that responsibility is not black and white. There's shades of grey. And perhaps it comes back to these factors like poor frontal lobe functioning, low physiological arousal. Don't you think we have to weigh these factors in the scales of justice and create a metric, a scale of culpability, just like we have a scale of IQ? Now, what goes into that assessment would be a matter of debate amongst legal scholars, I'm sure, and amongst scientists and psychologists. But I think we could, and I think we should. I think what we also have to do is think about the victims. I defended a man who raped and murdered a beautiful young woman. I defended him, I brain scanned him, I showed he had poor frontal lobe functioning, presented that to the courts, and he escaped the death penalty, in part because of that evidence. But if that girl who was raped and murdered was my daughter, no, I'm yelling for the death penalty. It's my flesh and blood. So I think we have to think about the victims, and I think we have to think about alternatives for them. We need to think about things for the victim here. If we are beginning to get rid of blameworthiness, because the victim and their families, they want somebody to blame. So, any system that wants to, take away blameworthiness will have to consider what we put in place to appease the segments of society and even appease part of ourselves. Because I think retribution is core in human nature to some extent. I think we have to think hard about this. That's difficult. As we have greater capability of predicting in the future, using big data, putting data sets together, medical data from early on, I think in the not too distant future, we'll have a lot of information on people. I think that a point will come where we'll be able to take an adult and say, well, this individual has not yet committed a serious violent offence, but putting all our data together, we think in the next 2 years, he's got a 50% chance of committing a serious violent act. Imagine if we could make that prediction. What do we do with that person? And a lot of people would say, well, until somebody has done anything wrong, you cannot do anything. It would be morally wrong. Yeah, civil liberty, But the counterpoint is that we have the knowledge. We have the knowledge of a 50% chance of them committing a violent act. And if we do nothing and they go and kill someone, we have blood on our hands. We've got the blood of that innocent victim that we could have saved if only we had acted. So when I think of this scenario in my mind, what if we can predict in the future? One of the questions that comes up is, how accurate is the prediction? Because we know no prediction will be perfectly accurate. What if it's 80%? Or what if it's 70%? Or 60%? I don't know. I don't know where we'll draw the line between acting and not acting. Now, as soon as you talk about biological brain data, everyone gets worried about that. And I think we can talk about that. There's a lot of reasons why people get worried. But just before we go into that, we have to make decisions every day about what prisoners to release early because they're not at risk, and which prisoners to keep in more because they are dangerous. And right now in the United States, often there's no formal assessment. It's up to the judge. What is he using? What's the basis for his judgment? So I think that what would be better in society is to have much more formal risk assessments of offenders. And I think it does occur in some states at some level in the United States. But could it be formalized and structured a lot more? Some people don't like the idea of making these predictions, but let's think about it. If biological and neuroscience data could help us make better predictions, more accurate predictions than we are doing now, what's wrong in that? I suppose one thing we can consider is a form of detention which is not as punitive as prison. What shape that will take, I think, is open to question. Not yet. No, it's not yet. But I think you saw some recent data that we had on cognitive functioning in young offenders, and showing that cognitive functioning declines during the time you're in prison. So that's not good news, because poor cognitive functioning is already a risk factor for crime. If we can do that, then we can translate that into lives saved, money saved, and then the public could be persuaded. I think what we need to do is have an experimental study that has a different option to prison, and then show, compared to a control group, we can reduce recidivism. Because I think the skeptics will say, show us the evidence. Show us the evidence that this will save us money. Not just talk, but evidence. Well, that's something that scientists could help do in the future. We do feel differently about white-collar crime. We think it's not as serious as violent offending. We've done very little on that. We've only done 2 studies on white-collar crime. One is published, the other is under review right now. So in both of the studies, really, it's brain imaging work. And our prior study had shown that white-collar offenders have actually increased volume of grey matter in the frontal cortex. They have better executive functions, which is a neuropsychological term reflecting better functioning of the frontal cortex. Now, what we make of that, I don't know. I mean, obviously white-collar crime is a more sophisticated form, and that if an individual has a better brain, let's say, then perhaps this is giving them an advantage over others to perpetrate white-collar crime. How this then gets translated into punishment for white-collar crime, I think I'm not sure. But certainly white-collar crime is different to blue-collar crime or street crime. There are different factors underlying it. The white-collar criminals don't have the risk factors that the street offenders, the violent offenders, have. I think the public will say they didn't have any of the risk factors for crime. They should even be punished more harshly than some of the street offenders. We go back to retribution, because I think the perception with white-collar criminals is that they have full control. They have free will. He's got full free will, and he should be punished more. I know, it gets very difficult and tortuous, really. And then I think it goes back also to the fact that, surprisingly, we have very little research on white-collar criminals. In criminology, the conception of the white-collar criminal is that it's not the individual, it's the institution. It's the institutional atmosphere that creates an atmosphere for white-collar crime. Because criminology at its heart is sociological. It doesn't look, as psychologists do, at individual differences. There's a lot of ways in which neuroscience impacts the law. Judges recognize that neuroscience is, there's new advances. They want to understand what are the implications for the law. That does not mean to say that judges are going to immediately accept neuroscience knowledge. But they want to know. They know they need to learn more about And somebody will talk about brain imaging, and they will talk about the strengths and the limitations. What conclusions can we draw from brain imaging on, let's say, lie detection, and what can we not say? Because judges also have to make decisions on whether to allow neuroscience information into the court, the Fry hearing, the Dilbert hearing. So they have to learn more, and they were never trained in neuroscience. So there's certainly a lot of interest. Yes, I think it's made me more understanding. It really has given me insight into why people behave as they do. I think has made me, over time, slowly, a more accepting person. My wife, for example, if she gets upset about something, I think, well, maybe today at work there are things that have made her upset because she's not usually like this. I think of that with my children, and I recognise it's true for me too. And I think one example that we can all get some insight from is the Netherlands. When there is a question about whether somebody is responsible for the crime that they have committed, they get sent to an assessment centre. I don't know for how long, it may be 2, 3, 4 weeks, but they get assessed, they get very fully assessed, and those assessments include neuropsychological assessments, basically brain functioning assessments. And the scientists there, or the clinical scientists there, create a 5-point scale of responsibility, and they make an assignment of this individual in terms of their degree of responsibility, and that's presented to the judge. My colleagues in the Netherlands tell me the judges can't deal with 5 points, it's too many, but what they do is they compress that scale to a 3-point scale. Responsible, not responsible, something in between. But that also determines sentencing. What I like about that system, even though it's probably not perfect, is that it's standardized. You don't have several centres throughout the country, you have one. And what I wonder is, what if Italy had that? Then it may not be applying to every single legal case, but it might apply to more cases than it's being applied to now. And could there be a trusted body of individuals who would objectively try and come to a judgment using more objective data than we do at the moment, which could include more objective measurements and assessments? I think they're placed, rather like in the United Kingdom, they're placed in secure hospitals. It's like prison, but it's more on rehabilitation. I think the liberty and freedom of the individual is not taken away as much. But of course, secure, depending on the level of dangerousness. My understanding is that the downside of this is that the person is not released until they are viewed as no longer dangerous. So that might mean they serve a longer sentence in a secure hospital than in a prison. But the legal system could say, look, they won't serve any longer than they would have served in prison, perhaps. If it was viewed that they are less responsible, they are less blameworthy,